Welcome back, Beyond Rome listeners. And I am here with Gerry McDermott, Dr. Gerry McDermott. Welcome to Beyond Rome, Gerry.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here, Simone.
I'm so glad. And for those who don't know Dr. Gerry McDermott's work, he is a scholar, professor. He has written this incredible book that I just finished reading, Israel Matters, Why Christians Must Think Differently About the People and the Land. He's also an Anglican priest. I'm going to say an Anglo-Catholic priest. I'm going to ask you what that's all about, Gerry. And yeah, I'm just so happy to have you on the show. And could you give us a little bit more about who you are? Because it's very impressive. I think you have 3 children, 14 grandkids, and still getting to know your beautiful wife of 49 years. So
Yeah, so they say the second 49 are the best, and we're looking forward to them. So I taught for 26 years at Roanoke College. That's a Lutheran ELCA college in Southwest Virginia, and taught the world religions and Christian and Jewish thought. And then I ran the Anglican program at Beeson Divinity School for 5 years in Birmingham, Alabama, on the campus of Samford University. I retired from full-time teaching in 2020, and I've been teaching part-time at Reformed Episcopal Seminary in Philadelphia and Jerusalem Seminary over in Israel. And I write and speak and podcast, and I help at local Anglican churches too. And I have 3 wonderful daughters-in-law who are responsible for those 14 grandkids. So we're very grateful for, Jean and I are very grateful for those 3 wonderful daughters-in-law.
Incredible. And one of your sons is a Roman Catholic, you had mentioned.
Yes. So our oldest son, Ryan, is a professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh, and he married Dara, who was Baptist at the time, and they are Roman Catholics, and they have given us 6 wonderful Roman Catholic grandkids. In fact, we're going to go see them this weekend in Pittsburgh.
Oh, neat.
So yes, they are our Roman Catholic grandkids, and then our other 8 grandkids are Anglo-Catholic. And they all go to the Anglo-Catholic Church that our youngest son, Sean, is the rector of.
Oh, that's incredible. Okay, so explain to us, because I think you're, even though you're Anglo-Catholic, you might be the first non-Catholic on Beyond Rome. I don't think yeah. So that's really neat. But I thought it was important to have you on the show because, I mean, you know so much about the Catholic faith. You have Catholic family. You went to Catholic school. You're an Anglo-Catholic. So explain what that is to those of us who might not know what that means.
Well, generally, Anglo-Catholics are devoted to the faith of the undivided church of the first millennium. So I love Pope Gregory the Great. And I can say I believe everything that Gregory the Great believed and taught. So all the great creeds and all the great councils, and the notion that the church, capital C, is our final authority and teaches us how to interpret the Bible. So different from evangelicals who say they think they know how to interpret the Bible for themselves and they have the authority to interpret the Bible for themselves. We say no. It's the church of the first, it's the fathers who teach us. So we read the Bible at the feet of the fathers, which is very, very similar to Roman Catholics.
Yeah, very similar. And to, as you know, or maybe you don't know, maybe you forgot. I don't know. You don't have to remember every detail of my life, Gerry, but I'm Armenian Catholic. So,
Right.
I try to have,
I do remember that.
yeah, so try to have as many of the Eastern churches represented. But I would love this book to be read by educators and seminarians and Catholic priests and Catholic educators, youth ministers, because I think it's so important. And in the beginning of the book, I think I say that most Catholics don't think about Israel that much. Okay.
Right.
And if they do, not in a bad way, but this is kind of just the air we breathe, I think you just are a low key supersessionist. So unless you're formed or taught or investigate otherwise. So would you kind of explain to us what that means, and if that's true, if you agree or disagree, or your journey of how you kind of got into Jewish Christian relations, education, and scholarship?
Well, I agree with you, Simone, that most Christians, Catholics and Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox particularly, are supersessionists, as you put it, low-key supersessionists. Now, what is supersessionism? Well, the root word there is supersede, which means transcend and essentially replace. And it has to do with the people and the land. So those are the two parts of supersessionism. First of all, the people. The supersessionist believes that after Jesus rose from the dead, that God's favorite people were no longer the Jews, because most of the Jews at that time did not accept Jesus as Messiah. And his affections, as it were transferred to the church of Jesus believers, which very rapidly became dominated by Gentiles, non-Jews, especially in the second and third generations. So God's first affection for the chosen people of the Jews in the Old Testament time was superseded by his new affection for the Gentile church in the times after the New Testament. That's the people. That's the first part of supersessionism. The second part is the land. That whereas in the Old Testament, the land of Israel was considered to be the center of the kingdom of God, after Jesus rose from the dead, which is probably 30 AD, we're talking, all the lands of the world became equally important to God, as Mahalia Jackson used to sing triumphantly. God has the whole world in his hands now. And so the land of Israel is no longer the Holy Land. It's no longer special. It's historical. It's where Jesus and the apostles lived and walked. But it has no theological significance today. So the Jewish people have no theological significance anymore unless they accept Jesus as Messiah. And the land has no more theological significance today. Those are the two parts of supersessionism. And I was a supersessionist. I was a great fan of N.T. Wright. In fact, Tom Wright is a friend of mine, and we've done ministry together. I hosted him twice in the States for long visits, and he and his wife and my wife and I went and did things together. And I love Tom, and he's a man of God, but he's totally wrong on these things. And he knows that I think that, and he actually has a copy of Israel Matters. He hasn't told me what he thinks of it, but I imagine he disagrees with it. And so I was so 25 years ago, I was leading a church tour of Israel, and we had a guide who was getting his PhD at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he was an MK, missionary kid who had grown up around the world and went to Israel at one point, met an Israeli Messianic Jewish woman, fell in love, and they got married. And that was, and went on to have 7 children. And he was my guide. And every time I would give a little talk at each biblical site explaining the theological meaning of the site, he would take me aside privately. He was very humble and very polite. take me aside privately and say, Gerry, have you read so-and-so? I'd say, no, I never heard of that scholar. Have you read such and such a book? No, I didn't know such a book existed. And pretty soon I caught his message. Gerry, you're completely wrong in everything you're saying here at these biblical sites.
Wow.
You are giving a supersessionist approach to each site, which really is wrong. And so I was very humbled. And I went home and I started looking up these scholars, their articles and their books, which led me to more books and articles. And pretty soon, my theological vision was transformed and expanded. And I realized that supersessionism is neither biblical nor um, properly theological. And that was 4 books ago and probably 100 articles on these things ago.
Yeah, I think you can't, if at least speaking from the like Catholic end of the last 20 some years, you can't help but be at least a low-key supersessionist. I certainly didn't think that that Jews are not God's chosen people. I never fell into that, or would believe like Christians are now God's chosen. I never, that didn't not adopt that, which is why I just say kind of low key supersessionism. And I certainly, believe there's something, the scandal of particularity is not something that I'm uncomfortable with on a spiritual level, because I think God's very specific with me. So it's hard to not believe in how specific and personal he is. But I would say that I did fall into like, so interesting to me how, the temple is destroyed and now Jesus's body is the temple. And isn't it so obvious that now, for Jews, like, gosh, don't they see like the church is like the next thing? And none of that is untrue insofar as like sound doctrine and theology. But I think what makes it kind of low-key supersessionism is that it doesn't grapple with the full implications of the mystery of Israel and all that scripture and tradition actually have to say about the people and land. So again, that's why I say at the very least, like low-key supersessionism, where you're like, see, it's all like neatly and tidily. And I would never say like, oh, Jesus doesn't, he abolishes, not fulfills. No, he fulfills, not abolish. I would agree with that. But I think in our hearts and minds, it's ultimately supersessionism. So I think it does actually take a work to kind of like untangle that out of Catholic hearts and minds, and why I think your book is so important and should be like widely read. Do you think, look, the Catholic Church does not teach supersessionism and has made a lot of strides to like, make sure that that's understood or known insofar as she can for this massive church. But do you have hope that at some point even low-key supersessionism will exit the hearts and minds of Catholics? Or do you think it's always going to be there as a temptation? Or how long do you think it'll take? I don't know if you think about these things.
Well, I'm not a prophet, so
Yeah.
I cannot predict the future, but there's a good number of us scholars, Catholic and non-Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox. Some of us who are Anglican. I was just talking to a few of them, scholars, this morning on another Zoom, and a good number of Protestant scholars who are what's called post-supersessionist. And we founded a society at the AAR, the American Academy of Religion, and, about 10 years ago, called the Society for Post-Supersessionist Theology. And it's been growing and growing. More and more numbers each year of Jews and Christians, Catholics and Protestants, biblical scholars, historians, scholars of other religions, theologians, and ethicists who are have come past have come beyond supersession. So I have hope at the scholarly level, and things often trickle down
Right.
from the scholarly level, because then they teach the future pastors. They
Mhm.
influence the seminaries, and once you reach the pastors who preach on Sunday, then hopefully this gets translated to people's minds in the pews. So I do have hope, yes, that things are going to change. Um, so I'm somewhat optimistic about the future.
Now, I can imagine some people maybe perhaps listening to this saying, well, why would I trust an Anglican priest? I don't care if he's Catholic. So that's why I'm like, read the book, everyone. And also, like, nothing you teach in it, nothing you're saying is contrary to Catholic thought and teaching, and certainly where she's been going. So I want to put that out there. Um, but, how are I've always loved being Catholic because of the nuance, the prophetic impulse, the like both and you being an Anglo Catholic, I think is obviously right there with that. When we encounter something like Genesis 12:3 and the Ted Cruz thing and all that, Catholics are like, I don't in any way want to be associated with any kind of Protestant, evangelical, reductionistic eschatologies that are tied to Israel, Jews, and the Jewish people. So how do you sort through that, and how can a faithful Catholic or a faithful Christian read Genesis 12:3, and say, okay, here's an actual good like reading from it, that doesn't necessarily just put me in the evangelical camp.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not an evangelical. I
Right.
was at one time, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that for your Catholic audience is that the evangelical believes that he or she has the right and the duty to interpret the Bible for himself or herself. And we Catholic Anglicans say no. We interpret the Bible at the feet of the fathers, at the feet of the um, great tradition of the church, capital C. Um, Look, I am teaching Roman Catholic doctrine, you might say, because at um, at Vatican II, in the document called Nostra Aetate, which means in our age in Latin, uh, I learned Latin and Greek in high school about 100 years ago in New York City at a Jesuit high school. Um, the the fathers of the council, the bishops who wrote Nostra Aetate, said that Jewish people are still the chosen people, and God's covenant that He made with them in the Old Testament and in Genesis 12, and including verse 3 that you just quoted, Simone, is still in place. And they referred to Romans 11:28 and 29, as they should have. Because in Romans 11:28, Paul is talking about his fellow Jews with much grief that they had not accepted Jesus as Messiah. And yet he says they are still beloved to God because of the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they are still beloved. Even though they haven't accepted Jesus as Messiah, God still loves them. So in verse 29, the very next verse, and Nostra Aetate, the Vatican II fathers quoted these two verses. He says, the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. Now, the calling, that's a biblical word for God's calling the Jews to be his chosen people and his oldest son, as he says in Exodus 4:22, that the Jewish people are his oldest son. So when Paul says in Romans 11:29 that God's calling is irrevocable, not to be revoked, It will never be taken back. That means God's calling as his chosen people, of the Jewish people. So Paul, and he's writing Romans probably in about 57 AD. So almost 30 years after the resurrection, Paul is saying that just because the majority of Jews have not accepted Jesus as Messiah, now, tens of thousands of them by that time were, and probably over 100,000 did accept Jesus as Messiah by the time Paul wrote Romans. But nevertheless, it was still less than 50%, probably. And yet Paul says in Romans 11:29, and Vatican II quotes this, that their calling to be the chosen people is irrevocable, not to be taken away, will not be revoked. And then he says, their gifts are irrevocable too. And the number one gift for Jews in the first century that God gave them was the land. So Ezekiel, the tragedian, Philo, the great philosopher, who was a contemporary of Paul, the number one gift that they talked about was the land of Israel. And the land promise to the Jewish people is stated or implied 1,000 times in the Old Testament. 1,000 times. And I know that because I've counted all those places in my first book called The New Christian Zionism, which is an academic book. So I'm the editor. I wrote several of the chapters in it. I put all these guys together. These are scholars from different background. And we chronicle all the times in the Old Testament that God repeats the land promise that you just referred to in Genesis 12:3. So Nostra Aetate, the Roman Catholic document in Vatican II, it affirmed now it talks about the Jewish people still being the Jewish people, still being the chosen people, and God's calling of the Jews to be his chosen people, that covenant still being in place. Now it doesn't talk about the land. Nostra Aetate does not talk about the land, but your friend and my friend Gavin DaCosta, great Roman Catholic theologian, put out a book in 2019 called Catholic Documents on the Jewish People After Vatican II, in which he calls for a minimal Catholic Zionism. And I know you've had him on this podcast, and he is one of my dearest friends. He is such a wonderful guy, and a brilliant theologian. And he has shown how Catholic documents, just in the last 20 years, do point in the direction of the second part of post-supersessionism, that is, the land itself. So these are Catholic doctrines. These are not just Christian doctrines. They're actually Roman Catholic doctrines.
And how would you respond to Catholics that say, so the church got this wrong for centuries and now all of a sudden she's changed her mind, this is a rupture, we can't trust this?
Well, Catholics believe in development of doctrine. And John Henry Newman, who has had a huge impact upon me and my thinking as an Anglican, wrote the famous book, Development of Doctrine. And doctrine does develop over time. Look, I would say to these folks, the word Trinity is not in the New Testament. It's not in the Bible anywhere. The doctrine of the Trinity, three divine persons in one divine being, that all Christians, Baptists, Pentecostals, Eastern Orthodox, and Roman Catholics, and Anglicans agree on, that's not specifically in the New Testament either. It took 300 years of theological questioning and argumentation, and sometimes even physical battles in the streets, finally hammer out that word Trinity that Tertullian first came up with, and the understanding of the Trinity that the church finally accepted after 300 years. So the church develops its doctrine. Now, Zionism is stated explicitly in the New Testament 3 times, and it's implied uh, all over the New Testament. That book, the New Christian Zionism, chronicles and documents. Um, and it's true that supersessionism and the fathers of the church in the first 3 centuries were a mixed bag on this. Some pointed to it, and others pointed against it, and some did both. And from the 4th century, Constantine, on through the 16th, it went underground, you might say. And in the 16th century, starting with the Puritans in England and the Pietists in Germany, it starts to come above ground again. And it was above ground in the New Testament and for some of the early fathers in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And so it comes above ground again in the 16th century, and Catholics start to catch hold and start to think about it, and then finally come up with this wonderful document in Vatican II. And now, since Vatican II, particularly with great saints and popes like John Paul II, it has it's moving more and more forward.
Yeah, I can't wait to read this book a second time through, because there were so many moments when I was reading it where I thought this is really helpful, not just clarity wise, but just language, because we're in this moment of confusion of like, not just like Protestant evangelical versus like Catholic Zionism, but like all the geopolitical issues going on. And there's this huge tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater and to like oversimplify the conversation. And I think you say something really beautiful in there. So correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't throw out the church because of her humanity and her brokenness and her imperfections. Why would we throw out the Jewish people in Israel for that if we don't even hold ourselves to some impossible, perfect standard where we often fall short? So I thought that was super helpful. How would you, Galatians 6 is the Israel of God. That's another thing that I see a lot of Catholic influencers not really go as deeply into. Would you mind explaining that verse for us?
Sure. Galatians 6:16.
6:16.
Now, the first thing to understand is the context of Galatians. Galatia was a section in what's now Western Turkey. And the church there was probably either 100% Gentile or 95% Gentile. John Gager and other scholars have shown this. And I've written about it. And I'll read the verse here, Galatians 6:16. It's a mysterious verse. And the first thing to say is that nowhere in the New Testament and nowhere in Paul, and Paul is the one who frequently is blamed for supposedly a supersessionist view of Israel. Paul was believing and teaching anything but, in fact, quite the opposite. So Paul says in Galatians 6:16, he says, "For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And as for all who walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them, and," Greek word here is kai, "and upon the Israel of God." Now, many Protestants and Catholics have lifted that last phrase, the Israel of God, up and out, and say, you see, here's proof that the church, the Gentile church, is the new Israel, or the true Israel, and it has replaced the Jewish people, who are the old Israel, And now the true Israel is made up of Gentiles and not Jews anymore, or those Jews who accept Jesus. Um, so that's how that phrase has been lifted up and misused.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 30 years ago, I would say, well, of course, that's what Paul means. That's what N.T. Wright says he meant. But I've written extensively on this, and many scholars agree with me. That's not what's going on here. Let's look a little bit more carefully at this verse in context. First of all, the New Testament never says, Paul never says the church is the new Israel or the true Israel. Not once.
And can I make a comment about that?
Yes.
Because the Catholic Church does refer to herself as the new Israel, but the way that it understands that is not in a supersessionist way.
Yes.
In the same way that we'll call the Hebrew Bible the Old Testament, but we don't mean it to be obsolete like this.
Yeah.
So it's I think the reason, I'm making stuff up now, but I think I'm not wrong. The reason that pastorally and the Vatican you don't hear New Israel a lot is because they're trying to weed out supersessionism, and it can be easily mistaken in a supersessionist way. So I would say New Israel is a legitimate phrase, but only understood properly. In the same way that, yes, there are all these covenants, but we're really ultimately talking about one covenant. And so, yeah, is the church New Israel? Sure, but not in the way that removes the distinctions between Israel and the church. So I just wanted to like caveat that to people who are going to possibly accuse.
Simone, I think you put it very well. That you almost, or I'd say perhaps perfectly. That was a very good caveat, a very good contextualized comment. So the Israel of God, in short, means the Jews who accepted Jesus. Now, let's look at the actual verse. For all. Now, the all here means all Gentiles, because the church in Galatia was almost entirely Gentile, or 100% Gentile. For all Gentiles who walk by this rule. Now, what's the rule? It's what he just stated in the previous verse, 15. The new creation that Jesus has brought to both Jews and Gentiles who accept him. It's a new creation. We're already living in the new creation in the church, and particularly by the sacraments. So for all, and he's speaking to these Gentiles in Galatia, for all you Gentiles who walk by this rule, the new creation, who walk in Jesus the Messiah, who is giving us our new creation through the sacraments of the church, for all of you Gentiles who walk by this rule, the new creation, peace and mercy be upon them. And Kai, the Greek word, and also upon the Israel of God, Jews who walk by the new creation. In other words, Jews who accept Jesus as Messiah. He has to add this last phrase, separated by the conjunction Kai, and, because there most likely were either no Jews in the Church of Galatia, or just two people at the end of the last pew there. But he's primarily referring to the Jewish saints, in other words, the members of the church in Jerusalem, back there in Jerusalem, and they are the true Israel of God. Mm-hmm. So peace and mercy be upon them too. Okay, that's probably that's, I would say, most likely what Paul means by the Israel of God here. And notice, the Jews are the true Israel. Yes, in some contextualized sense, the church is a new Israel, but it doesn't replace the.
Yeah, and why would St. Paul talk about being grafted in? Like, there's like a useless Bible verse unless it means something mysterious and prophetic.
Yeah. And that, by the way, was not completely new because, for 2,000 years before Paul, the Israel of God, which was the Jewish Israel, always had sojourners who came and lived there and didn't want to become Jews. The men didn't want to get circumcised,
Right.
but they accepted the Jewish liturgy and the Jewish faith that the true God is the God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And they worshipped him. They participated in Jewish liturgy and Jewish worship and the Jewish sacraments, except circumcision, because they remained as non-Jews, like a lot of David's lieutenants in his army were Gentiles, but they lived in Israel. They served the God of Israel. They served his army, and they lived as sojourners. And they didn't keep all the Jewish commandments like in Leviticus, the Jewish specific ones, but they kept the Noahide commandments. And the rabbis always taught, as long as Gentiles worship the God of Israel and keep the Noahide commandments, which are pretty much the 10 Commandments, then they will have a share in the world to come. And the world to come was the Jewish phrase for what Christians call heaven. Um, so, so when Paul says in Romans 11 that Gentiles who believe in Jesus are grafted into Israel, it doesn't mean they become Jews. It means they become like the sojourners in the Old Testament period, who um, become members of what Paul says in Ephesians 2 is the commonwealth of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The commonwealth.
Such a great, yeah, that part in the book was so helpful. Like associates. I don't know if that's the word you used. Yeah.
Associate members.
Associate members. Yeah.
Commonwealth of Israel. It doesn't mean that Gentiles become Jews. It doesn't mean that Gentiles become Israelites. They remain as Gentiles, but they're in the Commonwealth of Israel, and they partake of all the promises.
It's so interesting. I think that when I like to meditate on like you know, the interesting thing is like the prophetic, the mystery of Israel, how this all works, the economy of salvation. That's like the fun stuff where my brain can go. But then I have to think about anti-Semitism too. And I wonder, I often wonder if those who, forget anti-Semites, anti-Judaic spirits roaming around that, have the potential to like turn into that. I always wonder if the like spiritual root of the problem is that discussion that you have about the scandal of particularity. Like, unless you encounter Jesus very specifically, like apart from like a theological or historical unpacking of like, yes, he had a thumbprint. Yes, he had a personality. Yes, he was Jewish. Yes, he was born in a particular town to a particular tribe to a particular people. But like, until you encounter him as particular to you, I think accepting the whole mystery of Israel thing will be all the more difficult. I don't know. Thoughts about
it? Well, I agree with you, Simone. And it's part of the scandal of particularity that the deists had such a terrible time with, and still do today. There's plenty of deists today who say, yes, it's okay if you believe in God, but he's a generic God, and it doesn't matter which God you believe in, as long as you are basically a good person.
Yeah.
But if you start to say that God is a particular kind of God, then you're a bad person, because you are an exclusivist and you're not an inclusivist. You believe in exclusion instead of inclusion, and that's a bad way to be. It's an immoral way to be. But the true God is the God of Israel, whose son is the Jewish Messiah by the Holy Spirit. That's a very particular God who comes to the world in a very particular way. And once you accept that, then you have accepted the scandal of particularity. And you should be open to another part or another manifestation of the scandal of particularity, which is that God still has a chosen people on the earth called the Jews. And there still is a holy land on earth, a very particular land. It doesn't mean he doesn't love all other people in the world. He does. Doesn't mean he doesn't want to save all the other people in the world. He does. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't give value to all the other lands of the world. Of course he does. But there is a chosen people, and that's a particular people. And there's a particular land that is a holy land, as well as his son still being Jewish at the right hand of the Father, still has a Jewish body with Jewish marks on his body at the right hand of the Father. And scandal of scandals for Catholics and Anglicans like us, we believe in the Eucharist. And we believe that in the Eucharist, there is not just the real presence of the divinity of Christ, there's also the real presence of the humanity of the Messiah in his Jewish body, in his body and blood. Now that's the scandal of scandals.
Yeah.
That we actually participate in this Jewish body.
It can be a hard sell sometimes, but once you're there, you're there.
Yeah.
I was really interested in I am immersed in Catholic world more than Orthodox stuff, but Lev Gillet, could you tell us about
Lev
him?
Gillet, fascinating guy. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
felt like that was it.
Yeah. His dates are 1893 to 1980. He was a French Catholic who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and in fact became a Russian Orthodox priest.
Wow.
After spending 3 years as a prisoner of war during World War I with Russians.
Gosh.
He was a very smart guy, trained in philosophy. He became a chaplain to an Anglican Orthodox ecumenical fellowship in London from 1948 until his death in 1980. But toward the beginning of World War II, when he was a refugee, I mean, he went through a lot of suffering in his life, from Nazi-occupied France, he wrote this beautiful book called Communion in the Messiah.
Wow.
Its date is 1941, right at the beginning of World War II.
Wow.
And in this beautiful little book, he urges us Christians to realize that Israel has a special claim on the goodwill of all Christians. He says the people of Israel have a privilege and priority to the birthright, since they are the elder sons. Now, John Paul II used that same phrase, the older sons, but later John Paul II changed his language from older sons to fathers in the faith, saying our religious Jewish brothers are fathers in the faith to us Gentile Christians. So, Gillet, and he might have gotten that from Gillet, I don't know.
Or Pope, the only person I've heard is Pope Benedict. I mean, you know more about this stuff than I do, but Pope Benedict was really careful about that because he really wanted, he didn't want like elder brother Jacob and Esau vibes with the Jews.
Well, of course, Benedict and JP worked together and fed each other theologically.
Yeah.
So Gillet said, look, the religious Jews are the Jews in general are the older sons in God's family. They are the corpus mysticum, the mystical body into which we Gentile Christians are grafted. Now, using Paul's language in Romans 11. And he said, if Paul's right, and of course Paul is right, it's sacred scripture, then the earthly problems of Israel, Gillet said, are not outside for us Gentile Christians. We should make them our own.
Wow.
So to help a Jew, he says, it is to help Israel fulfill its mysterious identity to which it's called. So Zionism is a theological question that no Gentile Christian like us can ignore, he said.
Wow.
Now, what is this mysterious identity? Well, he said that Israel has been called through its history, through its 4,000 year history, to the sufferings of the servant in Isaiah, and to somehow, through those sufferings, to reveal God's power. And at the same time, he said that Israel's mysterious identity was to await and help embody the Messianic era, which is specially realized in the land. So Zionism, he said, quote, is neither a part of nor in addition to Judaism, but the concentration of Judaism and the fullness of Judaism. Zion.
Wow.
So you really don't understand Judaism unless you get on the land and feel it in the land. He says the land has a sacramental quality. Now he's speaking as a Russian Orthodox, and Catholics and Anglicans should grapple with that the land has a sacramental quality, and it's only there that a Jew can feel himself entirely Hebrew, he wrote. He said, because there's a sacred quality to the land. He was influenced by Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, who said the land, quote, is the visible and the efficacious sign of a spiritual reality. And Gillet said, this is true for Christians too. All of Palestine is not only the shrine where Jesus lived and died and rose from the dead, but it's also the land of the presence, capital P, the presence, the meeting place of Yahweh and Israel, and the Shekinah. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners know the Shekinah is the manifest presence of God, his glory. He said the Shekinah may still be felt there in the land. Now, I don't know about you, Simone. I know you've been to the land probably many times. I'm going again in October for my 24th visit.
Wow.
I definitely feel the presence in the land. Not
Yeah.
not every day there, not every moment, but often when I'm there. So this is what Gillet calls spiritual Zionism. And its motive force, he said, is not the striving of politicians or economists, but the vision of Isaiah and Amos. And it's what Buber meant when he wrote, quote, one can only reach Zion if one has passed through Zionism, close quote. So the true meaning of the land is not political. It's not about the state of Israel. It's spiritual. The land represents the messianic mission of Judaism. And it's especially revealed with the establishment of the state of Israel, which Gillet lived through and he experienced. And he said he became even more of a Christian Zionist after 1948, when he said restoration has come and spiritual Zionism is once again competing openly with political Zionism.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I wish that the scriptures and these teachings and this understanding and this practice meant that we didn't even have to have a word, Zionism, that it just meant the faith. Mm-hmm. That's what I wish, because so much of it has been co-opted by politics and all the things that it's just so hard to. And Gavin DaCosta was really kind to me. I'm like, now how do we get people to follow their personal vocations and stay in their lanes, and the politicians do what they do and they're well informed, and the theologians do their work, and lay people pray and fast and befriend Jews? Like, how do we get everyone to just all hands on deck, according to your unique and unrepeatable callings. He just so kindly, as you know, he's so kind, goes, no, it's all very messy. And we all just have to all get in, but I think everything that you just shared about Gillet and his understand is that it's so important, because the evil one really distracts us. And to miss out on the depth of the mystical body of Christ and exchange it for distracted, reductionistic, hyper politicized conversations, it just really makes us turn our gaze away from our Jewish Lord and Messiah. So thank you for unpacking all that. That was so beautiful. And I didn't know about him before reading your book. So I'm so grateful can't wait to learn more about him. Do you have any final thoughts for, Catholic listeners on just, where you would encourage them? Because this is not an easy moment to delve into these things. But if we don't take up Gillet's call to understand Judaism on its terms, which is so connected with the covenant, which is so connected with the land, then we miss out on the actual gospel. And so there's a lot at stake here.
We should, Catholics and all Christians should believe the words of the Bible and the words of Paul, that the Jewish people are still beloved in God's eyes, and God is still in mysterious covenant with them, even those who don't see the beauty of Jesus yet. And we should believe the words of the prophet Jeremiah, who in chapter 31, and that's the most famous chapter for Christians in Jeremiah, because that's the chapter of where Jeremiah talks about the new covenant. And actually, since in Hebrew, there is no separate word for renewed versus new, hadash. In context, Jeremiah probably means the renewed covenant. But Jeremiah says there in verses 25 through 27 that the Jewish people will always remain before God as a nation. That's the word he uses, as a nation, as long as the sun, moon, and stars are in the sky. Now, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm looking out my window right now, and I can't see the sun directly, but it's sunny, and I'm pretty sure the sun is out. The sun is still in the sky, Simone. So if a Catholic or any other kind of Christian believes the Bible is the word of God, he should believe that Jeremiah is right, that the Jewish people will still be before God as a nation, and still are today. And secondly, that the land is still holy. The land still has theological meaning. And in the Old Testament, God's covenant with Israel was not just about them as chosen people. It was also about the land. It was repeated, as I said, 1,000 times. And it's all over the New Testament for those who have eyes to see. The problem is most of us don't have eyes to see, because we've been told by our pastors, our preachers, our seminary professors, our university professors. And I was taught this at the University of Chicago in the divinity school, where I did an undergraduate degree, that the land promise is not in the New Testament at all. Well, it is in the New Testament. It's all over the New Testament. And we should know that. And so those are the two things that I want your listeners to be reminded of, that the Jewish people are still God's chosen people, even today, because the sun is still in the sky and the stars are still in the sky tonight. I believe they will be. That's my firm faith, Simone, that the stars will be in the sky tonight, and that the land is still a holy land. And Jerusalem is called holy 5 times in the New Testament, by the way. And most of the New Testament was written long after the resurrection of Jesus. And Jerusalem was still being called the holy city, the holy.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to have you back on.
I'd love to come back.
If this episode was helpful for you, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a rating and review to help us spread the word, and donating at philosproject.org/give with the comment Catholic to support this podcast. To learn more about becoming a Christian leader in the Near East, check out our Pathfinder free online courses, also on our website. Thanks for listening. See you next week.